welcome everyone tonight to another edition of the Souls of Black Folk broadcast. And we're happy to have you with us. We always say in the name of Allah, or God, and the beneficent, the merciful, when we engage in any undertaking, we call on him for his help and a guiding step for us. The Souls of Black Folk broadcast, of course. I'm your host, student minister Rodney Muhammad, here in the city of Philadelphia, and the co-host here, student minister Michael Muhammad in Atlantic City. And so we're happy to come before our audience again to talk about some of the more loaded and explosive issues of the day. And obviously, we're in a world that's growing a lot more feisty and in some cases rowdy and even threatening. And so we try our best to bring guests on to provide you with information to help us see if we can mentally seize some of these events of the time and give them greater definition, meaning, and perspective. So welcome to the Souls of Black Folks. Tonight, we'll be talking about political empowerment. We're certainly in a political season right now. We're in a time called the midterms, and the midterms is generally a time where after general elections and whatever party controls Congress, they come to this election period where a lot of seats are up. And for this political season called the midterms, we're noticing that the level of participation is phenomenally higher than it customarily is, where we usually have a real low turnout. It almost seems like people aren't interested in who's in office, who's coming out of office, or anything at the levels. But this time, it's not so. And not a day goes by where you're not inundated, probably in your areas, especially if you live in what they call a swing state. You're probably just inundated with all kind of toxic ads about one candidate or the other. It seems to be more of a culture war going on. Less about issues are being really talked about. I don't know if potential voters out there, constituents, are really getting the benefit of talking about issues that are really coming right down to their kitchen table. And so this is even challenging to many of the representatives that the people have in government. It's a very toxic time. So we also know that the Speaker of the House, Nancy Pelosi, had suffered a home invasion wherein her husband suffered a fractured skull, attacked by someone that we're finding out now has been radicalized, feels that Nancy Pelosi is the leader of the pack of Democrats that are selling the country down the drain. And of course, this is coming from the other side of the political argument. And, you know, normally in a time like this, it doesn't make a difference what party you belong to. If you're an elected official and your home's invaded and your spouse is attacked, but the attacker makes it known that they're looking for you and they want to bring you bodily harm in a way that it sends a message. It almost sounds like gangsters and a hitman or something, but you know, we want to send a message out there to others in a threatening way. You would think that all elected officials in a bipartisan way would come out together and condemn these kinds of acts in the strongest terms. And of course, there have been from the Democratic Party several voices that have come out to express concern and to condemn this violent act here, or any acts of violence and intimidation But from the Republican side now, there's been only 2 Republicans out of the entire Republican Party that have condemned this. One, the majority leader of the Senate, Mitch McConnell, he has condemned this. And from what I'm understanding from political analysts and that, now he's a target for those that have been endorsed by Donald Trump and running around in some of these swing states for offices, and that when Congress reconvenes, they're looking to see if they can have a vote to take Mitch McConnell out because of this. But I think he tried to do the responsible thing in representing government by condemning this. And then, of course, the other Republican was Liz Cheney, the daughter of Dick Cheney, one who was in the Bush administration when the towers were attacked in New York City in 2001, September of 2001. And so with these 2, we have no one else that is added. It's believed that there are many who do condemn these acts that are in the Republican Party, but they're afraid to look like they have a concern about one of their colleagues who just happens to be a Democrat and not a Republican. So, and of course, we don't condemn, we don't condone acts of violence, so much so that we in the Nation of Islam, we don't even carry firearms. We're a people of peace. Peace is central to Islam. And so we believe that we have to be strong enough to stand on any truth that we see and believe to be the truth. And we desire the freedom to express our views, but we also must be strong enough to hear views from others that may not necessarily be in agreement with our own. And so in the marketplace of ideas, we are certainly hoping that we can bring the present civilization back to some platform of sanity, because it seems to be growing more and more insane. You know, Brother Michael, I'm reminded of October the 16th, 1995.
Yes, sir.
After a call by the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan for the Million Man March. And, you know, this call came at a time that he was in the process of holding all men's meeting. This was the first one at the Armory in New York City.
Yep.
But before that, he had practically traveled to every city in these United States of America, calling for a stop the killing. And it brought crowds in all of the cities to the tune of 10. Some of the cities we went in, even 20,000 people were out. But there in New York City, he wanted 1 million men to meet him in Washington, D.C. And so when we did that, you know, the next order of business was, what is the follow-up going to be? And I think people should appreciate first that the first fight we had after the Million Man March was the count. And the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan said, we have to fight this because they want to define this day that God has given us, and we can't let them control that narrative. So we immediately went to fight. And our regional minister then, Minister Don Muhammad out of Boston, the son-in-law to the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan, Leonard Farrakhan Muhammad, I remember them on national television. We were beginning to dispute their claims that it was only 400,000 people out. If you go back and look at the pictures of the Capitol building all the way to the Lincoln Memorial, but on that plaza, I mean, bodies are spilling over everywhere. 400,000 people could have fitted neatly into that the little cavern that we had. I mean, people were everywhere and still coming, notwithstanding that the turnstile for the metro in Washington, D.C. on a Monday, on any given Monday, they carry 200,000 plus passengers through the turnstile. On Monday, October the 16th, the turnstile read 847,000 people. So just from the train, it delivers a death blow to their argument that there was only 400,000 people out. But you know what was more important about this, after you deal with the numbers, I thought was that we paid our own way. We weren't sponsored. We weren't waiting on anybody to pay.
Right.
Black men went in their own pockets. Black men set up their buses. They put their money together and rode on trains. They came on planes. Some even walked from Philadelphia all the way to Washington, D.C. But the determination, the self-determination that we showed from there, we were looking at translating this into political empowerment. And so right after the Million Man March, what some people may not know, we had the World Day of Atonement in New York City. We were right there at the United Nations at this time because the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan was inspired not only to be the vessel for God's call for 1 million men to come to Washington, D.C., but he was also inspired to get up and begin to go abroad. I think it was, we could count that as like the first World Friendship Tour. But when he went abroad into these countries, what we didn't know was that they all watched the Million Man March. So all over the globe, they were watching this fantastic, unprecedented, historic event going on in America. And the negative images of Black men that had been exported throughout the world through movie cinema, death blows were shown to this. Menace to Society, Boys in the Hood, the more gangster-like rap that was coming out at that time and was being exported around the planet. It gave people an image of Black men that was not necessarily a correct narrative, but a more corruptive narrative. So the Million Man March politically was already working without any real necessarily follow-up plan. It was producing its own fallout. It did a death blow to that. 1.7 million young people registered to vote. Crime went down, even though the FBI took credit for it. But the other thing was the National Association of Black Social Workers showed that 25,000 Black orphans, within 2 weeks, applications were in for all of them following the Million Man March. So men who were being depicted as making babies but not taking care of them, running away from their responsibilities as fathers, and that here were Black men putting in applications for children who did not have parents at home. So we were trying to translate the strength of these men coming together in Washington, D.C. into some kind of political empowerment. And of course, the minister calling us for moral and spiritual development. Go join a house of worship. Doesn't have to be the mosque. Go to the church, go to the temples and synagogues. And if those places are only engaged in worship and tenets of the faith, okay. You can still join a local organization that's designed to help you work toward liberating your people from many of the ills that we found ourselves in. So politically empowering ourselves is what I guess I'm trying to get to for tonight's show. Is a major outcome from us gathering at the Million Man March. I didn't know if you had any thoughts on that, but I'm just trying to look at it and sort of chronicle this thing for our viewers. We had a poor people's political convention in St. Louis following the Million Man March. Well attended. And I remember we wanted to have what we call a God-centered political reality. I think people should understand that, a God-centered political reality. And we should not look at that as, oh God, here they go talking about religion and everything. Every politician that you elect is sworn in, putting their hands on a Bible.
Yeah.
And in a country that wants to separate church and state, it doesn't look like that ceremonially when the president of the United States is standing there being sworn in by the Supreme Court justice on the Mall of Washington, and they're being sworn in and they're using a Bible. Congressional people using a Bible. Maybe the problem isn't that they're putting their hand on the Bible. The problem might be they're not opening the Bible and reading it, its contents, see how to govern God's people. But we just haven't had that discussion yet. Some of the things that have happened, I think, since the Million Man March, because there's been a deterioration, and the country, as the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan said in, was it 1990 when we were in Detroit? And he said, the unraveling of a great nation. It's coming apart. And now President Biden is saying that democracy is on the ballot. Everybody's, the buzzword now in the political world is, we stand to lose our democracy. They almost act like they're under attack by a foreign power or something, but really everything that's happening to her, just as the minister said, is happening right inside her own borders. Nobody is tearing her apart. She's unraveling herself. So tonight we'll be talking more about that, and we're going to have a guest on an elections commissioner that hit the national spotlight when Joseph Biden ran for president and Donald Trump was running for re-election as president. And he can share with us some of the dynamics that are happening now as people go out to exercise the constitutional right to vote. But some of the things that happened since the Million Man March, I remember one of the strongest provisions of the Voting Rights Act of 1965 was stripped from it. And by stripping that from it, you could still have the voting rights bill, but it's impotent. It doesn't, with that provision being stripped from it, where local municipalities are not being supervised, first monitored, overseen, and supervised with how they're handling people that are coming to register to vote and how they're handling people who come to vote. And I think what people have to understand is constitutionally, we were supposed to already have a right to vote, but nothing was preventing local municipalities from saying, you want to vote? Tell me how many jelly beans are in that jar. You want to vote? Let's lather some soap up in your hand and tell me how many bubbles come out of that lather of soap. Some ridiculous things. One of the most famous ones was a man was asked to read something in English and the Black man read it. So they put something there in Spanish and he read it. They said, what does this mean? And he read it. They put it in French. They said, what does this mean? And he read it. And then they put something in Chinese and they asked him, well, what does this mean? And the Black man said, it means you don't want me to vote. They were looking for everything. You used to have to name, in some places you had to name how many counties are in your state. Then they may ask you to name all the counties. And if you couldn't do that, you wouldn't be allowed to register to vote. Well, the Voting Rights Act has a provision in there that if anybody tries it at these local levels, that they would be charged, and that the federal government would step in to right that wrong so that they can make sure that those Black folks in particular would be able to exercise their right to register and their right to vote. Well, that was taken out by the Supreme Court. That part was taken out of the voting rights bill after around 2003, 2004. But nevertheless, with that taken out, it makes impotent the Voting Rights Act of 1965. And so you're right back where you started again. And so one of the other things that has come up now since the Million Man March are voter ID laws. And what type of identification really qualifies. Something else that's happened since the Million Man March are closing of voting polls so that we don't know, we don't know where you're going to be able to vote. And so they're making it more challenging for people when they close the voting polls. And I think we had some numbers once. I don't have them available for me tonight, but the number of polling places has been shaved down tremendously. And so it makes a person just say, well, you know what, I'll just stay home. I'm not going to even bother with it, because you have people that don't want to go through hurdles. And then, of course, a growing number of people now are being intimidated at the polls. And so we hope to talk to Omar Sabir, who will be joining us tonight to talk about the safety of poll workers as they have fought for the increase of pay for poll workers and that. But there's so many political items, and I'm holding up a book called The National Agenda. And the National Agenda, of course, is a book that we had. The National Agenda is a book that we had done after the Million, or for the Million Family March. And it was done by one of our past hosts, Ben Chavis, who was the national director of the Million Man March. And the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan sent him to begin to work with those in the civil rights community and other stakeholders throughout the country to put together something that could serve as a good follow-up. And so the National Agenda is a book that the Nation of Islam still publishes. And in that book, you'll find input coming from a wide range of organizations about what we need to do, how they see the problems, and what are some of the action steps that we need to be engaged in, so that when we're engaged politically, we're engaged in a meaningful way, hopefully, where we can bring about some real results and better outcomes for the people. And in 2015, the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan called Black people, in particular Black people, back to Washington, D.C. under the banner Justice or Else, Justice or Else. And the day following his major address there in Washington, D.C., he was asked about follow-up. And the minister had Brother Rasul, who heads up our products division in Chicago, Brother Rasul Muhammad, to bring the book, The National Agenda. And he held that book up and said, this is the follow-up. So even though the book talks about political analysis and political issues dealing with the year 2000 to 2008, if you look in that book, there's nothing that we're talking about today in Black America that concerns us, concerns our communities, things that we are deeply and passionately um, involved with bringing about change in, all of it is in that book. You can't talk about gentrification, it's in that book. You can't talk about immigration, it's in the book. I tell you folks, everything. This book has a foreseeing quality to it, that the issues that we're coming in today are not brand new. We're not unfamiliar with them. Those that have been deeply involved politically have seen some of these things coming because they've been practiced somewhere. And the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan wanted to make the tent bigger to bring more and more of our people in who are thinkers, who can help us to begin to organize. We set up local organizing communities that primarily had stakeholders in our cities to help come together. And some have done better than some of us to hold these kind of coalitions together. They're not easy to hold together over protracted periods of time unless you're seriously engaged in projects and hopefully making progress with those projects. But as different issues have come up, we have tried to do our best to unify our people to work toward issues. One of the major things I think, Brother Michael, plaguing the cities, and you might want to weigh in on this, is the sharp increase in homicides resulting from gun violence.
Yes, sir. Yes,
and
sir.
that was the thing that led us to the Million Man March in the first place. It's in the pledge. I read the pledge Sunday at the mosque, and it talked about I would not beat, shoot, or cut anybody, not just any other Black person, but any person, any human being, except in self-defense.
Yep.
People have to do what they need to do to. And so I don't know if, say, in Atlantic City or any other city you've been in, if you've listened to the news or the crime stats in your cities.
Brother Minister, you mentioned something earlier about the all men's meeting at the Armory. At that meeting, the minister made us promise and pledge that we would not put our hands on another Black man or any person unless we were aggressed. And you mentioned also the increased gun violence. Recently, one of the rappers from the rap group Amigos was murdered in Atlanta in a dice game. And now there is a greater focus, and it should have always been this focus, particularly in hip hop and music, and how the music is steering people towards gun violence, towards misogyny, towards the disrespect of human beings in general. And coming up out of that community as a young man in New York City, it was not like that, prior to the Million Man March. We had Public Enemy, we had Rakim, we had Gangstar, we had all kinds of music that was promoting unity, a lot of partying music, but it was that time where you could actually dance to the music. And I think that the social responsibility that should be participated in by companies around the world that participate in promoting and making money from hip hop, it's not the case. And this music is promoted and contributes greatly to young people, gun violence, and the promoting of a culture of death. Our guest is here, Brother Rodney. I'm going to get us started.
Good. So if we can bring him on also to weigh in on the discussion. would be happy to receive our guests for tonight and offer us some things to help us to see better some of the events that are unfolding today. And there he is. And this is Brother Omar Sabir. Brother Omar, can you hear us?
I can hear you. I can hear you loud and clear.
Well, we say assalamu alaikum to you, brother.
Assalamu alaikum, sir.
Peace.
I say wa alaikum assalam to you.
Yeah, and you know, Brother Omar, just want to say I did see your flyer this morning where you have something at the Philadelphia Masjid, right, and trying to bring the spiritual community to get more involved in, you know, what's coming up. We well, first of all, welcome to the Souls of Black Folk broadcast. And you're on with myself, Rodney Muhammad, as a host, and my co-host is Brother Michael Muhammad out of Atlantic City. And so we do this show, and it's nationally aired on this podcast. So we love to have you. We talk a myriad of issues here, and of course we've had the 5% Nation on with the history of that, and we were just discussing about how the music has become more toxic since the early days of rap that had more of a message of peace and everything. And now we find ourselves plagued with a high level of homicides nationwide due to gun violence. And that was the impetus for all the Stop the Killing meetings that we had during the 90s, right, Brother Michael, where
yes, sir. Mm-hmm.
We had 10,000, 20,000 out, and it led to the men's meeting, and then we were at the Armory, and then the call for 1 million men to meet us in Washington, D.C. And we saw a sharp decrease in Philadelphia with gun violence when Ed Rendell, as mayor, endorsed the principles of the march. And Joe Sertain was the city managing director then, and he organized a lot of people in the city. And I've worked with him, Barbara Cox, and Sandra Mills. It was Sandra Mills and Henry Nichols of 1199C. They played a big role in that. And so Philadelphia ended up sending more people to that gathering in Washington, D.C. than anywhere else in the country, our metropolitan area. And so, Brother Omar, we've been talking about how when Black men got together in 1995, you know, it's been our attempt to translate that into some type of political empowerment. And of course, voting played a big role in our book, The National Agenda. And I'm going to make sure I get you a copy of that so you know what we put together in 2000. But the whole thing about voting rights and that, and we just were talking about some of the things that happened since the time we were in Washington, D.C., stripping the Voting Rights Act of 1965 of its most potent provision. I mean, then you had a shrinkage of polling places. Mm-hmm. So people finding it more difficult to get to places to just be able to vote. You know, voter intimidation, gerrymandering, just a lot of things that are done to serve as hurdles in that. So, Brother Omar, I know you've been focusing since you become election commissioner. You were in the national spotlight when Donald Trump was running for re-election, and of course Biden was running, and there were calls about there may be voter fraud going on and all of that. Can you talk to us about, you know, that I remember seeing you a couple of times on the news and the national news there?
Sure. But first, I'd like to just go, because it all kind of intertwines, right?
Yes, sir.
So when we talked about the rap music, right, and the messages, right?
Yeah.
One thing we have to look at is that there were more independent record owners at that time. So they kind of controlled what the messages were. Now, there's there's these groups that have sort of monopolized the ownership, the distribution of the music. So they control more of the messages now. They got these 360 record deals.
That's right.
Where they get a percentage of your shows, they get a percentage of your appearance and your likeness. Mm-hmm. So you're obligated more to the record label. And so you don't have an opportunity to say the type of things that you want to say on a record. They tell you what to say, and we don't hold those owners accountable. And that's sort of something that we want to look into. If we look at the language that they're using, as far as like how many times rappers use the N-word or use the B-word, or how many references they use to people using drugs. I mean, it's actually a public safety sort of concern. And I think we have to hold these record labels, people that's profiting off of this sort of music, accountable. I mean, when C. Dolores Tucker was talking about that kind of stuff, you know, God rest her soul, and she was talking now, me being an older man, really, you know, appreciating the things that she's saying. We have to hold them accountable because y'all make money from this, you know, and it's trackable. Is metrics that you know that track this, you know. So and then you notice where if you talk about any other group other than Black people, it's not acceptable. You could talk defamation, sort of like language or bad language, to any other group except for, but when you talking about Black people, it's acceptable. If you talk about any other group other than African Americans, that's a problem. And I think we have to look at that and sort of examine, you know, so what you could talk about killing us and doing harmful things to us. When we talk about another group, it's a problem.
It's a problem.
Right.
You get a reaction.
Right. You sort of get this reaction, right? And so, and when we're talking about voting, we're talking about improvement and things of this nature. It has to get interwoven into the music and entertainment. It has to get woven into the culture when we're talking about political empowerment. And it's larger than candidates. Typically, what campaigns do now is it seems like they talk right over African Americans. They'll say, okay, don't vote for this person because he's a racist. And you don't really pull back the layers about the issues. And far too often, African Americans get left out of the conversation. And the policies are not enacted for them. And then you see people say, hey, well, why should I vote? Why should I participate in this system? And this is what I'm hearing from a lot of our constituents. And far too often, even in the African American community, we sort of dismiss them and say, oh, what you talking about? You know what I mean? You know, people die for a right to vote. Yes, this is true. But there was policies that were enacted when you saw the civil rights movement, why they acted, they knew, okay, we didn't want to sit in the back of the bus no more. So we got to change this policy. We wanted, you know, housing. We wanted, you know, all these different issues. They had issues, and that's what made the people want to participate in elections. And then also they tied that into the popular culture. So you saw the Sidney Poitiers, you saw all of the
Harry Belafonte.
You saw all of those that was kind of interwoven in that. And so that's what we have to kind of really look at, because there's a disconnect inside the African American community, you know. And I don't think the problem is so much us not voting or us not doing anything. I think the major problem is the disunity, right? We don't have no unity and we don't have no love. And that's what the focus needs to be, about self-empowerment. And then I think you'll start to see the sort of results that we're going to have to improve our community.
Mail-in ballot. Are you seeing, you know, obviously you're collecting them and storing them. I think I saw a news clip where you all were in a place where these votes are being secured, the mail-in ballots coming in. But there's an argument that the other side that calls voter fraud, and that if you guys are just getting this and stacking it up and not counting them now, but only after election day, then we're not going to know November 8th who won what. Say in the Senate race with Mehmet Oz and Fetterman. It's going to take some time for us to know who actually won that race.
Not necessarily. No, well, not necessarily, right? Because the majority of people I know in Philadelphia County, they vote on the machines, right? So we'll have those results at 9:30, right? And then we'll have a large portion of the vote by mail ballots counted, and then maybe by Wednesday morning we'll be done. But again, we might be able to call the election, you know, at 9 o'clock, depending on what happens across our county. We might be able to. I know we're going to be able to call some of the races. You know, like I say, it just depends. Like I said, if it's real close, I mean, just like any other election, like even if it was on the machines, If it's real close and the margins are very close, then it's going to take more time. But typically when the AP calls a race, they just base it off of, oh, okay, this person is up by, 30,000 votes. And, we only got 20,000 left to count. So they call a winner, right? So,
Okay.
Depending on, what happens, it could be right away. It could be a
Okay.
recount. I mean, we don't know. But we just can't always take that position that's going to take, a long time for it to happen.
Just listening to some of the political analysts, and they were concerned with, well, if you can't count the votes now, the other side will be saying this is where voter fraud comes in and that kind of thing. But let me ask you something about poll workers.
Well, of course. I mean, make no mistake about it. We should have, that's a process called pre-canvassing. They do it in Florida, Colorado, Oregon, where you begin the extraction process. So you slice open the envelopes, pull the ballots out, flatten them out, get them ready to scan them. That takes a lot of time, especially when you're dealing with, a couple 100,000 ballots. And then even in Pennsylvania, we have to put your ballot in that blue secrecy envelope. You have to do the extraction process 2 times. So you have to slice it, open up the ballot, get the blue envelope, then you got to run through the extractor again and pull them out. Then you got to flatten the ballots out. You got to sort them. I mean, it's a process. I mean, it's not like, and I've said this before, even on CNN, it's not like making a microwave dinner. I mean, it takes process. You got to be meticulous with this process, man, so we can get an accurate count.
Wow. No, poll workers, I saw one time where you were looking for increase. I think you successfully got the increase in pay for poll workers.
That's correct.
And then there I guess there's some safety concerns also now that it seems that the political environment is just growing increasingly more toxic. So can you talk to us about that?
Sure. I mean, we have an historic pay raise for our poll workers. They're going to get at least $250,000 an hour. If you're an interpreter, you're going to receive more resources. And this was the most significant pay increase for the poll workers since Mayor Tate was in office. And that was in 1972. And again, it was a strong collaboration between the faith-based community, elected officials, nonprofit organizations, nonpartisan organizations. And we did the research and we got the funding, historic appropriation from city council. We had appropriation from the state. So we got the resources and, we made it done, and it just, I just felt embarrassed. I felt embarrassed issuing those checks. The pay used to be $150, and like to get somebody in this day in this climate to come to work for $150 for 14 hours, I just felt so ashamed about it. And
yes, sir.
We there.
So now, obviously, I can remember because I've voted, since I was voting before I moved to Philadelphia, but the midterm has always been a disappointing time for a lot of us that vote. We have always been disappointed with the low turnout. And it's just like, where did everybody go? Did you all forget what just happened? But this time it seems like
that's not
a lot more people participating.
Well, that's not really a fair assessment, right? Because people say, oh, you come and everybody vote in the presidential election, then you don't vote again. It's like, no, you spent $1 billion in the presidential election. You was calling, you was emailing, you had signs. There was, there was money on the street, there was events, and then you go from 60 miles an hour and you go to 0. And then say, well, why you didn't vote? I mean, we had all this different stuff. So we need 365 days a year. We need to have civic engagement. We need to have conversations about it. And just the excitement inside of our community. I had a long conversation with one of our young constituents. It was in the 2021 election. I said, man, what's going on? You want to vote? He said, no. I said, why not? He said, I don't know, y'all not making a big deal out of it. And when he said y'all, he was referring to the elders inside of his community. I'm like, yeah, no, y'all ain't really making a big deal out of it. I'm supposed to vote. Well, okay, cool. What's the date? What's the time? So we have to take ownership of some of that responsibility, from our family and friends. Like, hey, when we got the enthusiasm, we enthused about voting, you're going to vote. I mean, the number one reason why someone will vote, and all data suggests that, is if someone that you know or trust asks you to do it. And if you ask them to do it 6 to 8 times per election cycle, then they're going to do it. It's like a 70% chance that they're going to vote. You know, I started voting just because my dad was on my head calling me every morning. The committee person would let him know who voted in the house, who they didn't see, and say, hey, you know, you get the call at about 10 o'clock, you know, you wanted to have. And my father didn't ask for much, but, you know, election day around 10 o'clock, and you wanted to be just on the right side of that call. He wouldn't yell at you. He just knew what it was. Election day, 10 o'clock, you calling. Cool, you know, give me that local 332 ballot, you know, who you got, you know. And I wasn't, and it took me to, I started having children, paying taxes, you know, having a house, for me to really start voting, you know, for myself. I get it. And it took a while. Right. It just wasn't really a reason. I think if we engage voters younger, you know, before their voting age, you know, we take them, show them what government is, right? There's a disconnect with government. You know, when I was younger, I remember, you know, knowing who Ashaka Fattah was, knowing who Alusha Blackwell was. They were in our face, they were in the community. Now there's a big disconnect between just the regular street people and elected officials. And so that's what we're seeing some of these lower turnouts. Another thing that may contribute to it is that a lot of the incumbents, they don't want high voter turnouts, right? So it's like, okay, it keeps them in office. So it's like, you know, why, if I already got the seat, if I already got the power, why would I even, you know, even tell people that it's an election going on, right?
Yeah.
So, right. So these are a lot of things we want to have a lot of conversations going on, right? You know, and it really has to be a strong push from faith-based organizations, nonpartisan groups like the NAACP, to get that sort of strength and to be around our community 365 days a year. People should have confidence going to getting help from the ACLU, the NAACP, these sort of organizations and instances, and have input on zoning in their community. Okay, the developments that's coming in. You know, do I have to move out? I mean, it's a lot of this is just not a one-way street. I know a lot of times you just say, oh man, you lazy, man. Why you ain't going to vote? Which, I mean, what we could do for our community from us just voting here now on Tuesday, nobody has a concrete plan. I mean, you definitely should vote. I mean, but I think sometimes from a leadership perspective, we have to kind of put ourselves inside of their shoes and see what solutions and strategies we can come up to better suit them.
So you're a younger person coming on the team.
I'm not younger. I'm 42, man. I'm old, man.
I said younger.
Okay, younger. I go with younger.
I mean, and I'm saying that compared to some of the other players that have been election commissioners and everything. But
okay.
Have you found your coming on? Is it becoming more attractive to younger, what they call the millennials or others to
so it's millennials and the generation. I got a millennial in my office. Hold on. Is it millennials with Generation Z, right? Generation Z is the youngest one. Okay, so Generation Z is the youngest group.
That's the youngest
like
group
18
now.
To like 30. And I think now the millennials now are like 35, you know, so.
Yes, they are.
It hasn't been more attractive because of the truculent times, you know, the death threats, the work. So people kind of like, I don't even know about elections, and as partisan as been, you really don't see a lot of younger people that want to be involved in politics. The average age for a state rep across our country is 60 years old. You know, we have a president that's in his 80s. Nancy Pelosi down there in her 80s, like leadership and so it's like we're starting to see older people stay in politics longer because when there's like strife or confusion, typically older people can weather the storm, and that's what people choose to sort of like weather the storm. So it's very, very interesting. And the baby boomers, you know, that's a huge, large voting block. So baby boomers are not really conceding no power. You know, and if the younger people, the younger Generation Z and millennials, that's the largest voting block in our country, but they just don't want the power. And it is what it is.
It's not as attractive. Some of the things with the time we got left, I'm hearing arguments now, and there was a big article in Mother Jones out of DC, I guess, that Barack Obama, our former president, had been reading about, and it's a strategy on the part of, right now it's being practiced by Republicans, and you can literally be in a state. They're focusing on state elections, state reps, state senators, Secretary of State, attorney general, and even governors. And with this kind of focus, you can literally have a majority vote, but fewer seats representing your party within that state. And I think it was Teddy Roosevelt that was to have said that Wisconsin was the laboratory, the political laboratory for America. That's where Social Security bounced out of, workman's comp, a lot of they were experimental then. And so I don't know if you're looking at it, but in Wisconsin, they're looking at going as far as getting rid of election commissioners, the bipartisan setup, and actually having the General Assembly be in charge of determining who's going to oversee elections in a given state.
Yeah. So what we saw happened in 2008 when President Barack Obama was elected. National Republican base, their funders, they knew that John McCain wasn't going to win. They knew, they was going to lose the presidency. And what they said was, okay, we're going to lose the presidency. Let's invest an unprecedented. It was very smart and clever. They said, well, let's invest in all state rep races all across our country, because the state houses are the ones that they designed the congressional maps. Mm-hmm. And then they didn't just start with state reps. They invested in school boards, local school boards all across the country. And they were spending big money in like these little small races that nobody really kind of like cared about.
Right.
But they were spending big money in all those little small little local races all across. I mean, the borough commissioners, the little smaller seats, and they knew, okay, we invest in them, they will be able to grow up to be state reps. They'll be able to grow up to be Congress or have influence in Congress. Mm-hmm. So no matter what, we'll sort of have some sort of influence there. And then even with a state like Pennsylvania, where you have a majority Democratic registration advantage, you still sort of have a Republican legislator by the way how it's gerrymandered, how to whisk it up, to whereas though it keeps incumbents in power.
Yeah,
and they did it all across the country, and it's been a lot of grassroots sort of working. Like they worked, like they was doing voter registration drives at gas stations. I mean, a lot of comments. They said, "Look, we're going to take the civil rights playbook and do the same exact thing they did in civil rights in the 60s and 70s." They literally took the same exact playbook and they put some money behind it, and that's the way how they doing they organizing. Man. It's not necessarily the big commercials and all that kind of stuff. We even saw in New Jersey, where a large speaker like the Republican caucus got beat by a truck driver. And he only had like $100 like in his campaign, but they had this sort of strategic grassroots plan that took him out. So, wow. I mean, and that's, where it's at. And that's where I believe that we sort of have to get back to conversations about politics with the average everyday person. It's a lot of times it's simple, playbook. They get close to election, you bring former President Barack Obama around, and then you call the other opponent racist, and that's enough to get the black vote. Where it's like, I've been seeing this playbook, but you want to try to really talk to people, communicate people, see where they're at, hear their issues, and let's see, can we invent policies that will help them. We're even seeing in Georgia, where there was actual study that was done by Black Men Vote, where they had the data in Congressional Black Caucus, how across our country, a lot of African-American men are going to Republicans. And the reason why they're going Republican is because they said the Democrats doesn't have any sort of policy for them. And it was interesting, even in Georgia, how they said Corey Kemp had a plan for African-Americans with vocational training, business opportunities, and Stacey Abrams didn't even come up with a plan for the African-American man. So I was like, wow. And so I think we have to sort of really look and say, okay, what's on your mind, from this young man that's out here, 1835, going through the things and the challenges, navigating through America. What's on your mind? And that's how we have to engage them. Hear what they are, and see if we can put some policies in place, and then they'll be a part of our society. And the wall that we have to break down is to let them know that you are important and that you are an American citizen. And no matter what your opinions are, you're paying tax dollars. So no matter what you're doing, whether you're living here, paying real estate taxes, sales taxes, you're contributing. So now just say Philadelphia, we got a $5 billion budget. State got like a 35, $45 million budget. This is crazy. All of this money that we have, and you're paying for it, so you have an opinion on it. We want to hear from you. And so that's, you know, and it has to be that sort of empowerment and to say, hey, you got power. When I was down in Jackson, Mississippi, you know, they had this museum down there where they have all of the like notes, all of the organizational structure from the civil rights movement. And it was very interesting, and it wasn't like candidate based, like vote for this person, lesser two evils. It was just, you are important and we need to hear from you. You need to have an opportunity to make a determination on your future. You can do this. And, you know, people don't, you know, sometimes people don't believe. Like, just take Philadelphia, for example. We have 1 million voters in Philadelphia, right? And the majority of those voters are African-American, Latino, and Asian. And when I tell people that, some people just still in their mind, they just don't believe. I'm like, yo, you're registered. 90% of Philadelphia is registered, but they don't have that sort of belief in themselves that we should have, you know, that 2% of contracts on African-American businesses is unacceptable. Like, at the end of the day, we can change it literally overnight. Non-African-American city council members. Like, it's the numbers are just staggering, but people don't believe that they can do this thing. So that's sort of like what we have to kind of drive home, to believe that you had the power and you can make a change.
Well, you know, we've run out of time, man. I'm telling you, Omar, we gotta, you know, post-election, if we can.
I'll be back, man. I'll be back. I like it.
Because we want to look at this whole thing. Yeah, we want to examine it.
Listen, I'm here, brother. You my brother.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Man. I'm with you.
Well, look, man, it's been great. God bless you with this effort, man. I hope we get these mail-ins counted real fast so we can call.
Mail-ins will get fast. Listen, mail-ins will get counted fast. If anyone has any questions, please call us at 215-686-3462. Our website is philadelphiavotes.com. We have all the information that you need in order to cast your vote. Find out where your polling location is. Pull up past election results. I mean, everything we revamped our website, and you can pretty much get everything you need off of there.
Election committee. Okay. All right. So that's a date, man. We're gonna come back and evaluate this thing, just like they do on the other networks. That's
right. We got to break the data down.
All right. Take care.
All right. Take care.
All right. And we thank you all for joining us here tonight on the Souls of Black Folk broadcast. And we'll be back. We just had Omar Sabir on. So, Brother Michael, any closing comments? Any thoughts?
Wow, it's a lot to take in, you know.
Yeah.
Great to see a young brother out there doing great things for the community. So I'm excited about having him back, going over some data.
And he has a broader perspective. He's looking at this thing. This thing is a lot more than just telling folks, come on out and vote.
Right.
Like you've never voted before and all that, and playing on people's heartstrings and emotions, but really analyzing this thing and what are we doing and why some people are participating, and he's examining why some people are not, and he's not condemning the people that are not, but he's trying to study more what's making them pull back. So, Brother Michael, thank you so much, and we thank all our viewers for another edition of the Souls of Black Folk broadcast, and until next week, God bless you all.